The cell block went quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. It wasn't lights out silence. It wasn't guard on patrol silence. It was the kind of silence that spreads when something is about to happen. Metal doors lined the tier. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Conversations faded one by one as a shadow moved across the concrete floor. A 350-pound inmate stepped forward. Broad shoulders. Thick arms. Slow, deliberate steps that made space without asking for it. Inside these walls, size carried a certain authority. And this man had built a reputation around it. New arrivals usually kept their heads down. Especially during their first week. Especially on this block. And standing near the railing, dressed in a plain gray prison uniform, was someone most people recognized immediately, even without the suit, the red carpet, or the film cameras. Keanu Reeves. No bodyguards. No script. No second takes. Just another inmate number on a temporary transfer list. Whispers moved quickly. That's him. From the movies. John Wick. Some expected him to look nervous. Others expected arrogance. Fame doesn't usually survive long in places like this. The giant stopped a few feet away. Close enough to invade space. Close enough to test reaction. The air tightened. Most men, when confronted by someone that size, step back without realizing it. It's instinct. Self-preservation. Keanu didn't step back. But he didn't step forward either. He simply stood there. Relaxed shoulders. Steady breathing. Eyes alert but calm. That confused people. The giant tilted his head slightly, studying him. This wasn't about throwing punches, not yet. This was about energy. About seeing who would blink first. Boots scraped lightly against concrete as other inmates shifted to get a better view. Even the usual background noise seemed to fade into the hum of the lights. The giant cracked his knuckles slowly. Still no reaction. No smirk. No challenge. No fear. Just presence. And that's when the block realized something felt different. This wasn't celebrity confidence. This was composure under pressure. The question wasn't whether a fight would happen. The question was whether one would even be necessary. Because sometimes the most powerful moment is the one right before anyone moves. Before the story grows bigger than the moment, it's important to understand something clearly. This wasn't a staged confrontation. No cameras hidden in corners. No dramatic soundtrack building tension. Inside a prison, hierarchy forms quickly. And when someone new arrives, especially someone known outside those walls, attention follows. Keanu Reeves wasn't treated like a celebrity here. He was treated like a question mark. In places like this, reputation doesn't transfer. Status doesn't protect you. What matters is how you carry yourself when tested. And testing is common. Not always violent. Not always loud. But intentional. The 350-pound inmate who stepped forward wasn't just big. He had built his standing through presence alone. His size created space. His voice ended conversations. Most conflicts dissolved before they started because few people were willing to challenge that kind of physical advantage. That's how power usually works in confined environments. Visible, physical, immediate. But Keanu's background followed a different path. 4 years he committed to disciplined training for action roles. Not just memorizing choreography but learning structure, repetition, and control. During preparation for films like John Wick, he trained in tactical movement, weapon handling, and close-quarters drills that required focus under simulated pressure. It wasn't about becoming invincible. It was about learning how not to panic. There's a difference. Film training doesn't make someone a cage fighter. It doesn't make them unstoppable. But it does teach posture, awareness, breathing, spatial control. And those things matter anywhere tension exists. The giant in the cell block understood physical dominance. He understood how proximity can make someone shrink. He understood that most people reveal fear in their shoulders before they say a word. What he likely didn't expect was neutrality. Keanu didn't posture. He didn't attempt to intimidate back. He didn't perform toughness for the watching inmates. He simply existed in the space without surrendering it. That's not flashy. It's not dramatic. But psychologically, it changes dynamics. When someone refuses to escalate, yet also refuses to retreat, it disrupts expectations. It forces recalculation. Inside prison systems, challenges often follow a script. Step 1, invade space. Step 2, provoke reaction. Step 3, escalate if weakness appears. But what happens when step 2 fails? What happens when there's no flinch? Observers on the tier began noticing small details. Weight evenly distributed, hands relaxed but ready, chin slightly lowered, eyes steady. Not confrontational. just attentive. It wasn't aggression. It was preparedness. And preparedness can be intimidating in its own quiet way. The key detail here isn't about who would win a fight. It's about perception. In environments built on quick judgments, people assess risk constantly. If a target looks unpredictable, controlled, or difficult to overwhelm, the cost of escalation rises. The giant wasn't just looking at a famous actor. He was evaluating resistance. And resistance doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands still. That's why the moment stretched longer than expected. Why whispers faded instead of growing louder. Why tension didn't immediately explode. Because both men were calculating. One used size his entire life to define interactions. The other had spent years training his nervous system not to spike under pressure. Different paths. Different tools. Same question hanging in the air. If intimidation fails, what comes next? The giant took one more step forward. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just enough to close the distance. Concrete scraped under his boots. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Conversations on the upper tier faded completely now. A few inmates leaned against the railings pretending not to watch, but watching. Space inside a prison is currency. And the giant was deliberately spending it. He stopped within arm's reach of Keanu Reeves. Too close for comfort. Close enough to test instinct. Most people react without thinking when someone invades their space like that. Their shoulders tighten. Their chin lifts. Their weight shifts backward. Keanu's didn't. He adjusted, but subtly. His left foot slid half an inch behind him. Not retreating. Just anchoring. His breathing remained steady, almost slow. Hands loose at his sides, fingers relaxed. The giant tilted his head slightly. Still studying. He expected something. A flinch. A defensive stance. Maybe even words. He got none. Instead he found stillness. First week, the giant said quietly, voice low and controlled. You picked the wrong block. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. A murmur ran through the tier. Keanu didn't answer immediately. Silence stretched. Then calmly, evenly, I'm just here to do my time. No sarcasm. No bravado. No challenge. The simplicity of the response seemed to frustrate the script unfolding in the giant's mind. Because intimidation works best when it creates emotional reaction. And there was none. The giant shifted his weight forward, chest almost brushing Keanu's shoulder. It was a dominance move, subtle but clear. The kind that forces submission through proximity alone. Keanu adjusted again. A small pivot of his torso. Angled. Balanced. Not confrontational. But not yielding. Observers began noticing something else. Keanu wasn't staring aggressively. His eyes weren't locked in challenge. They were scanning shoulder line, stance, foot placement. Reading. Calculating. The giant's jaw tightened. He tried another tactic. A light shove to the chest. Not enough to start a fight. Enough to provoke one. Gasps echoed from above. Keanu stepped back half a pace, controlled, absorbing the force without stumbling. His heel planted firmly. Spine straight. Eyes steady. No anger flashed across his face. Just awareness. That changed the atmosphere immediately. Because anger escalates situations. Calmness complicates them. The giant's breathing grew heavier. Not from exertion, from expectation. The expectation that the script would continue. Push, swing, chaos. But the script stalled. Keanu's hands lifted slightly now, open palms, non-threatening, ready. His stance lowered just enough to stabilize. Trained movement. Disciplined. Not flashy. The watching inmate sensed it too. This wasn't a movie performance. It wasn't reckless bravery. It was someone who understood pressure and refused to let adrenaline make decisions. Seconds felt longer than minutes. The giant stepped in again, faster this time. And something shifted in the air. Not violence. Precision. A subtle redirection of force. A pivot. A slight offline movement that disrupted balance without striking. The giant's foot placement faltered for half a second. Just half a second. But in tense environments, half a second reveals everything. The cell block didn't erupt. It froze. Because what they just witnessed wasn't dominance through size. It was control through timing. The giant steadied himself quickly, eyes narrowing, not in rage but recognition. He understood something now. This wasn't prey. This wasn't ego. This was someone prepared to respond without overreacting. And in prison, unpredictability can be more intimidating than aggression. Neither man spoke. They didn't need to. The tension wasn't gone. It had transformed. For a few long seconds, neither man moved. The giant had recovered his balance. But something invisible had changed. Not the hierarchy. Not the rules. The rhythm. Until that slight misstep, the energy belonged to the 350-pound enforcer. He dictated space. He controlled proximity. He initiated contact. Now, he was recalculating. Across from him, Keanu Reeves stood composed, feet grounded, shoulders relaxed. No smirk. No tightening jaw. No glance toward the watching tier for validation. That detail mattered. Because if this were about ego, there would have been a look to the crowd. There wasn't. The giant exhaled through his nose, slow and heavy. Then he stepped in again. Faster. This time it wasn't a shove. It was an attempt to overwhelm, forward pressure designed to collapse distance and force reaction. Gasps echoed from above. But instead of bracing head-on, Keanu shifted diagonally. Not dramatic. Not acrobatic. Efficient. His body rotated slightly off the line of force. One hand guided the giant's shoulder past center. The other controlled space near the elbow, not gripping, not striking, just redirecting. Momentum did the rest. The giant's own weight carried him half a step too far forward. Again, not a fall. Not humiliation. But imbalance. And in controlled environments, imbalance is information. The watching inmates felt it. This wasn't strength against strength. This was structure against mass. The giant planted his foot hard this time, stabilizing quicker. His face tightened, not with rage but realization. He had expected resistance. Maybe even a swing. He hadn't expected discipline. Prison conflicts often escalate because pride demands escalation. One shove leads to retaliation. Retaliation leads to chaos. But Keanu didn't chase advantage. He didn't counter with aggression. He simply reset his stance. Lowered center of gravity. Hands open. Breathing measured. The silence deepened. Even the fluorescent hum seemed louder now. A guard at the far end of the corridor glanced over but didn't intervene. From a distance it still looked contained. Two men standing close. No punches thrown. But everyone on that tier understood what was happening. The giant tried a different tactic. Words. "You think this is a movie?" he asked, voice low but etched. Keanu's answer came steady. No. Nothing more. No lecture. No threat. Just acknowledgement. That response stripped the situation of drama. Because drama requires exaggeration. And there was none. The giant circled slightly now, testing angle. His size allowed him to block light from above, casting a shadow over the concrete floor. Keanu turned with him. Not following aggressively. Maintaining alignment. Observers noticed the details. No bouncing. No wasted movement. No clenched fists. Just economy. Then came the moment everyone expected. The giant lunged, not wildly but decisively. A forward grab aimed to secure control through sheer strength. And that's when timing shifted everything. Keanu pivoted again, stepping offline as the grab closed in. His forearm redirected the incoming arm while his foot repositioned behind the giant's lead leg. Not a sweep. Not a strike. A disruption. The giant stumbled one full step this time. Concrete scraped loudly. A collective inhale swept the tier. And then, stillness. Keanu didn't capitalize. Didn't shove him down. Didn't strike. He stepped back instead. Creating space. Offering reset. That was the real shift. Because dominance would have meant finishing the exchange. Control meant ending it without escalation. The giant straightened slowly. His breathing heavier now, not from exhaustion but from recalibration. He looked at Keanu differently this time. Not as a target. As a variable. In prison dynamics, perception changes faster than reputation. Word spreads not through announcements but through observation. And what everyone had just observed was simple. This wasn't a man looking for conflict. But it also wasn't a man who could be overwhelmed easily. The giant wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Took one final step forward, then stopped. The tension that had threatened to explode minutes earlier, leveled out. Two men stood facing each other. Neither victorious. Neither defeated. Just aware. And awareness in tight spaces is power. The giant gave a slow nod. Small. Almost imperceptible. But clear. Then he stepped back. Not in retreat. Indecision. The tears slowly came back to life. Whispers returned. Metal clanked somewhere down the corridor. The moment had passed. Without a punch thrown. Without chaos erupting. And that silence? Felt different now. By evening the story had already changed. That's how places like this work. One moment happens. 10 people see it. 20 people retell it. And by the time it circles back, it barely resembles the truth. Some inmates on the upper tier claimed the giant almost slammed him. Others swore they saw Keanu drop the 350-pound man with a single move. A few exaggerated it into a full fight that never actually happened. But the reality? There was no knockout. No brutal exchange. No domination. What happened was quieter than that, and far more significant. The 350-pound enforcer had tested a newcomer. And the newcomer had refused to break script. Inside the block, reputation spreads in two ways, through violence or through control. Violence is loud. It earns attention fast. But it also invites retaliation, scrutiny, and instability. Control spreads differently. It spreads through observation. By dinner, conversations had shifted tone. He didn't panic. He didn't swing. He didn't get rattled. That last one mattered most. Because inside confined environments, emotional reactions are currency. If someone can provoke you into losing control, they gain leverage. If you stay balanced, the leverage disappears. Keanu Reeves didn't try to prove he was the toughest man on the tier. He proved something else. He wasn't easy. And not easy changes calculations. The giant, meanwhile, didn't lose face. That's another detail people misunderstood. He hadn't been embarrassed. He hadn't been humiliated. There was no dramatic fall, no crowd laughter. What happened was subtler. He encountered resistance that required more effort than expected. And in prison dynamics, effort equals risk. Risk equals reconsideration. That's why no second attempt came that night. No late ambush. No retaliation. Because experienced inmates recognize patterns quickly. They know the difference between someone pretending to be tough and someone who has internal structure. Structure is harder to dismantle. By lights out, the whispers had evolved again. He trains. You could see it in the way he moved. He didn't even look angry. That last observation stuck with people. Anger is predictable. Anger creates openings. But calm focus. That's harder to read. And unpredictability makes people cautious. Some inmates had expected celebrity arrogance, the kind that demands special treatment. Others expected visible fear, the kind that signals vulnerability. They got neither. They got neutrality. And neutrality disrupted the narrative. Because this wasn't about fame surviving prison. It was about composure surviving pressure. The giant reportedly told someone later, he's not soft. Not praise. Not surrender. Just assessment. And assessment carries weight. By the next morning, the block dynamic had adjusted almost invisibly. No one rushed to test him again. No one openly challenged. Not because he had won. But because escalation no longer looked profitable. That's the part the outside world often misses. People want dramatic conclusions. They want a clear winner and loser. They want dominance established in cinematic fashion. But reality often shifts through micro moments. A stance held. A breath controlled. A reaction avoided. That's what changed the atmosphere. And here's what made it more powerful. Keanu didn't talk about it. He didn't recount the exchange. Didn't brag. Didn't posture during meals. He kept routine. Ate quietly. Observed. Maintained distance. Consistency reinforces perception. If he had celebrated, it would have reframed the moment as ego-driven. If he had avoided eye contact afterward, it would have reframed it as fear. Instead, he did neither. He treated it like it was what it truly was. A test. Passed not through aggression but through steadiness. Meanwhile, the giant maintained his own reputation. He continued walking the tier with presence. Continued commanding space when necessary. But something subtle had entered the equation now. Mutual awareness. No alliance formed. No friendship declared. Just an unspoken understanding. Escalation would cost more than it gained. And in tight quarters, cost-benefit analysis governs survival. By the end of the week, the story circulating wasn't about a fight. It was about composure. About how the block fell silent, not because someone was knocked down, but because two men measured each other and chose not to push past a certain line. That line matters. Because crossing it would have triggered consequences neither needed. So when people later exaggerated it into a legendary showdown, they missed the core truth. The real moment wasn't physical. It was psychological. It wasn't about overpowering. It was about not being overwhelmed. And that's far rarer than people think. By the end of the week, the tension that had once hovered over the tier no longer felt sharp. It felt settled. Not erased. Not forgotten. Just understood. Inside environments where pressure is constant, people adapt quickly. They observe patterns. They adjust to new variables. And once something is measured, It becomes part of the mental map everyone carries. Keanu Reeves had been measured, and he had measured back. But the deeper lesson wasn't about physical ability. It was about emotional control. Most confrontations escalate because of ego. One person pushes. The other refuses to appear weak. Pride tightens. Voices rise. A single second of anger multiplies into chaos. That chain reaction never happened. Not because there wasn't tension, but because tension was managed. There's a difference between suppressing fear and regulating it. Suppressing fear creates stiffness, overcompensation, reckless reactions. Regulation creates clarity. During the confrontation, Keanu didn't deny the situation. He didn't pretend it wasn't serious. His posture showed readiness. His stance showed awareness. But his breathing never accelerated visibly. That detail may seem small, yet it changes everything. Breathing controls nervous system response. And nervous system control determines whether someone reacts impulsively or responds deliberately. The 350-pound enforcer relied on psychological momentum. His size created expectation. Expectation created hesitation in others. Hesitation gave him control. But momentum requires cooperation. The moment someone refuses to feed it with fear, momentum weakens. That's what happened on that tier. Not dominance, disruption. And disruption without escalation is rare. It's easy to be aggressive when challenged. It's easy to prove strength through force. But restraint requires higher awareness. Restraint says, I could escalate, but I won't, unless necessary. That message travels quickly in closed systems. Other inmates notice something else too. After the incident, Keanu didn't isolate himself out of fear. Nor did he roam the tier looking for acknowledgement. He maintained a steady routine. Routine communicates stability. Stability communicates predictability. And predictability reduces threat perception. Interestingly, the giant also adjusted. He didn't pursue a second test. He didn't attempt to reclaim dominance through humiliation. That choice reveals something important. Even individuals who rely on intimidation respect calibrated resistance. Because calibrated resistance suggests consequence. And consequence changes cost calculations. In high-pressure environments, survival often depends less on being the strongest and more on being the most composed. Strength can attract challengers. Composure discourages unnecessary ones. Over the following days, the atmosphere around Keanu subtly shifted. People still observed him. Still whispered occasionally. But the energy lacked hostility. Curiosity replaced aggression. That transition only happens when someone passes an unspoken evaluation. And here's the crucial point. He didn't win anything. There was no submission. No official hierarchy change. The giant remained influential on the block. But now there was balance. Balance prevents escalation. Escalation invites instability. Instability invites consequences from administration. And no one benefits from that. The real lesson extends beyond prison walls. Pressure tests reveal internal architecture. When someone's identity depends on dominance, they must constantly defend it. When someone's identity depends on discipline, they simply maintain it. Discipline is quieter, less visible, but harder to shake. During the confrontation, Keanu never raised his voice, never insulted, never mocked. That absence of emotional leakage communicated something more powerful than aggression could. It communicated self-possession. Self-possession cannot be taken. It cannot be forced. It can only be surrendered. And he didn't surrender it. The giant recognized that. Others recognized it. Which is why the block returned to equilibrium rather than chaos. If fists had flown, consequences would have followed. Segregation, lockdown, administrative action. Instead, nothing official happened. The moment dissolved because two men chose calculation over ego. That's maturity under pressure. And maturity in confined spaces is survival currency. The lesson isn't that size doesn't matter. It does. The lesson isn't that training makes someone invincible. It doesn't. The lesson is that emotional regulation often outweighs physical force. Because the person who controls their reaction controls the direction of the moment. In a world that rewards spectacle, this moment offered something different. Measured strength. Silent boundaries. Calm under stress. That's harder to dramatize. But far more powerful to embody. And perhaps that's why the tier fell silent in the first place. Not because they expected violence, but because they sensed a test of composure unfolding. And composure, when genuine, is unmistakable. By the end of the first week, nothing looked dramatic on the surface. No alliances had formed. No public declarations were made. No one spoke about who won. And yet, everything had changed. The tier moved the same way it always did. Metal doors clanged open at count. Trays slid across tables during meals. Conversations rose and fell like background static. But the energy around one bunk had shifted. Keanu Reeves was no longer being evaluated. He had been assessed. And assessment had led to conclusion. Not fear. Not dominance. Understanding. The 350-pound enforcer still walked with presence. His reputation remained intact. No one challenged him because of what happened. But he no longer tested Keanu either. That silent agreement spoke louder than any fight could have. Because real power structures inside closed systems are built on calculation. People constantly measure risk versus reward. They ask one question before escalating anything. Is this worth it? After that first confrontation, the answer became clear. It wasn't. And that clarity prevented chaos. Over the next few days, small moments reinforced the shift. At breakfast, someone accidentally bumped Keanu's shoulder. He steadied the tray. Nodded once. Kept walking. No glare. No reaction. During yard time, two inmates argued nearby, voices rising, tension spiking. Keanu didn't insert himself. Didn't spectate either. He kept moving. Consistent behavior builds perception. Perception builds reputation. Reputation reduces challenges. The giant noticed it too. Once, while passing near the stairs, their eyes met briefly. No hostility. No grin. Just acknowledgement. That acknowledgement mattered. Because it wasn't about submission. It was about mutual recognition of boundary. And boundaries prevent escalation. The outside world often misunderstands strength. It confuses noise with authority. It assumes dominance must be proven publicly. But inside that block, the strongest message delivered all week contained no violence. It said, I won't chase conflict. But I won't crumble under it either. That balance is rare. Most people tilt one way or the other. They overcompensate to avoid appearing weak. Or they withdraw to avoid confrontation entirely. Both extremes invite further testing. But steadiness? Steadiness discourages unnecessary risk. The giant, for all his size and history, understood something fundamental. Escalation is unpredictable. Unpredictability invites consequences. And consequences inside prison affect everyone. So he chose stability. And that choice completed the shift. No handshake was needed. No words spoken. Just space maintained. By the seventh night, the story circulating through the block had matured. It wasn't exaggerated anymore. It was simplified. He's disciplined. That word carried weight. Discipline implies control. Control implies unpredictability under pressure. And unpredictability makes aggression costly. Interestingly, the guards never filed a report. Because technically nothing had happened. No punches thrown. No injuries. Just tension resolved before ignition. And perhaps that's the most powerful part of the story. Conflict doesn't always end with impact. Sometimes it ends with calculation. In a culture addicted to spectacle, viral clips, dramatic knockouts, public humiliation, this moment stood out for the opposite reason. It was quiet. There was no triumphant walk away. No crowd cheering. No dramatic speech about respect. Just routine continuing. And that's where the viral message lives. Strength without arrogance. Skill without performance. Confidence without cruelty. Those qualities don't trend as quickly. But they endure longer. Because anyone can react. Few can regulate. Anyone can escalate. Few can de-escalate without losing face. That's the distinction people felt on that tier. Keanu didn't overpower the giant. He outlasted the pressure. He didn't dominate. He stabilized. And stabilization changed the social equation. By the time his first week ended, the silence that once signaled danger now signaled clarity. No one rushed him. No one cornered him. Not because he inspired fear, but because he demonstrated composure. Composure is contagious. When one person refuses to fuel tension, others often follow. That's leadership without title. Authority without announcement. And maybe that's why the moment lingered in memory. Because it challenged expectation. People expected a fight. They witnessed restraint. People expected ego. They observed humility under pressure. And in an environment where identity is constantly challenged, holding steady may be the highest form of strength. The giant picked the wrong man to intimidate. Not because he met someone stronger, but because he met someone steadier. And steadiness doesn't crack easily. The cell block fell silent that day. Not in anticipation of violence, but in recognition of control. So here's the question that lingers beyond those walls. When someone tests you, in your workplace, your home, your life, do you react to protect your pride? Or do you respond to protect your peace? Because sometimes the most powerful victory is walking away without needing one.